Hey guys, I'm a Science Potato, and today I have another quick Ultimaker guide video for you. Today we're going to go over just the preferences found within Cura. So you can click on the Preferences button at the top and go to Configure. And here we have our general preferences. So this has less of an effect on the specific code being generated by Cura, and more of an effect on just user preferences. So to start at the top, you see we have languages we can select. We also have a currency type, which default is the euro. So we're going to set that to dollars. For theme, there's a few different themes. Generally the Ultimaker theme, which is a white theme, or Ultimaker Dark, which is what I'm using here. That's why everything is all black and gray. I do this professionally, so I spend all day staring at these screens. So when it's a blinding white, it's hard on the eyes, and this dark scheme is much better to look at. But you can see here you do need to restart your app if you do change those settings. The other one is an automatic slice. So I always have this off as Cura does checks before it slices, and it makes Cura seem like it's frozen, but it's actually just thinking. And I don't need it to slice automatically. I would rather it just slice when I want it to slice. So in our viewport behavior, we can see the first setting is display overhang. So this is a pretty important setting. A lot of people get scared by this. So if you look underneath these 3D models here, you can see it's red there, red on the bottom, and inside this hole. That means it sees that as an overhang. Now we know that these two red patches here are directly on the build plate. They are not actually an overhang, so that's fine. But this little hole in here we know is going to need support, as is this area up here. But why is this area red and not all these other areas that will clearly need support as well? Well, the area that's highlighted red is the areas of your models that are going to have support generated on them based on your slicer settings. So if we look at our support values here, we can see our support overhang angle is set to 80 degrees, which is pretty steep. So that's why only this area is highlighted. But if we drop that down to say 65, now, more of this has turned red, so we know that support is going to be generated there as well. So if I just quickly hit slice, and we'll hit preview, so we can see that support is being generated in those areas. So that's all it really means by those red areas, is that that is an overhang, and support material will be generated there. But it can be annoying, or if you aren't sure, if it can be scary to some people to see that. I've seen a lot of posts about people worried about what that is. So generally you can go here, unclick display overhang, and then it will disappear. So then we have display model errors. So that's pretty good. It basically warns you when there are issues with your 3D model, especially if it's something you've downloaded on the internet. Who knows how well it was actually designed, and there could be problems with it. The third option is center the camera when an item is selected. So if I go and enable that, now if I click on something, you can see how my camera moves towards that object. I find that very disorienting and annoying when I'm trying to work on many parts at once. So generally I have center camera when item is selected disabled. You can also invert the direction of your zoom. So right now, with this enabled, if I scroll up, it zooms out. If I scroll down, it zooms in. And I don't really like that. I want it to be more natural, so I have that disabled. So when I scroll up, it zooms in. When I scroll back, it zooms out. Then we can zoom towards the mouse direction. So if I enable that, now with my mouse over here, you can see the zoom wants to follow the direction of my mouse. If I move my mouse over here, it zooms over here. If I have my mouse on the parts, it'll zoom into there. So that's more of a personal preference. It is quite nice sometimes to have that, and you can disable it or enable it as you please. The other one is ensure that models are kept apart. I usually have this disabled as it can be kind of annoying sometimes, but if I move a part into another part, you can see it's moving these parts so they're not touching. But I don't like the way it's moving. What if you accidentally move a part onto another part and now it moves that part, and say you have 20 parts on here, it can be really annoying to deal with. So I just disable that, and I just make sure to manually check that my parts are not overlapping. because if they do overlap and you slice it, they will generate G-code on top of each other, and it will basically print twice in the same area. So we can see how it's trying to put outer walls inside the inner walls of this other part here. So that's why you want to make sure, if you disable this function, that you check for that. Also, we can automatically drop models to the build plate. So if I disable that, I can select one of these parts, and I can lift it up, and it will stay there. Now I have support enabled, so it will print a support structure to support that in its current position. What happens if I turn off my support material? Well, we can hit slice, and we can look at what will happen. So we can see it is generating the G-code way up there. So that's why sometimes it can be important to have that function enabled to drop your models to the build plate. Because what if instead of your part being way up here, your part is now way down here, where it looks like your part is sitting on the build plate. If you zoom in real close, you'll see it's actually not, because we can see it's 10 microns above the build plate. And so that can be dangerous, because you think it's on the build plate, but it's not. So if we hit slice, and go down to our first layer, we can see there is no first layer being generated for that thread. So this part is not going to stick well to the build plate, and will probably have a failure. So that's one reason it's really good to have that one setting enabled to automatically drop models to the build plate. But again, personal preference. Caution message in G-code reader isn't really used much. I've never personally used it, although I never feed G-code directly to a printer through a USB cable. I always use a separate SD card, as it's less, there's less failures that way. You can force layer view compatibility mode. So this is more like if you have an old computer that doesn't have the latest code running in it that can generate visual information correctly. So basically, if you have an old computer and you try and look at your layer view and it doesn't work, you can turn this on to give you a simpler functionality for that feature so it's still usable. You can also restore your window position on start, so it always starts generally in the same location, as well as your camera, whether you want a perspective or an orthographic view. And then there are some other options down here. Some of these are pretty important. They do confuse people as well. Sometimes they'll load in a model and it's way bigger than it should be, or it's way smaller than it should be. That's because of these settings here. You can see it says scale large models. So if you load in a model and it's super huge, it may get scaled down to a small size automatically by Cura, which can be bad if you don't know that it's doing that, and you may not understand why your file isn't the correct size. Same with the next one, scale extremely small models. If you load in a part that's super tiny, Cura may make it larger, and if you're not aware of that, you may print a part that is the wrong size. You can also add machine prefix to job name, and that doesn't really matter, but it'll basically take the sort of initials of your printer name, whatever you've named it, and it'll add that in front of the file name that it saves. If you have a wide variety of printers and you need to make sure the correct code goes to the correct printer, that's good to have. But we have a huge farm of all the exact same machine, so it doesn't actually matter which printer I put the SD card into, it works on all of them. This is a pretty big one. Default behavior when opening a project file. So you can open up as a full project, or you can just import the models. So it's best to have this to always ask me this, as those are two quite different options, and you may want one or the other depending on what you're attempting to make. So always ask me this is the best way to go. Same with profiles. Anytime you change a setting on a profile, I have it set to always discard changed settings, because people can get confused if you have it to always ask me this. So if I turn it on, now it says always ask me this. So if I want to change my profile, I will now get a pop-up saying, hey, do you want to discard or keep these settings that you've changed? Here's a list of the settings that you've changed. And some people may be unsure about this. You can also change your settings here, but generally if you want to keep them, you would create a new profile with those settings, or you can discard them because you're done with those settings anyways. I have it set to always discard them, as if I need to save settings, I just create a profile. So we'll go always discard. And a few other simpler ones, check for updates on start, that's pretty good. You may not be aware of new updates that are out. And sending anonymous print information, just to help with the user stats and stuff like that. So those are the general settings within here that you can adjust based on your preferences. There's also the settings tab for our setting visibility for all our slicer values. There's also our list of printers and our access to the machine settings for those printers, as well as our materials lists and our slicer profiles that can all be found within this Preferences tab. Alright, that's all I have for you today. Thanks for watching my Cura guide. I'll have more videos on Cura as well as design, in addition to other 3D printing related topics. And I will see you again in the next one. Thanks, bye.